Hi, in this video we're going to be looking at generating a reflection from the Zillow character to add on to our building. This building does have Zillow reflecting in it, but there are moments where it's hard to see, so we're going to use what we learned in the basic sample with our reflection setup with Array Renderer to just generate another reflection that could be a little bit more pronounced from Zillow onto this building. Let's have a look at our 3D scene. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a card as a placeholder in place of this building geometry that we could project and use as a reflecting surface so that we could reflect our Zillow character onto it. So to do that, what I'm going to do is, looking at our building static, I'm going to just grab a axis just so we could place our card in the same location as this building, so it'll be in the same spot. So to do that, I'm just going to go to our object selection mode, and I'm going to say vertex selection, and I'll just select a point over here that represents our building, and then I'm going to create an axis node, and I'm going to use this snap menu for its orientation and have this axis snap to this position of the building. So we'll say match selection position. So there we go. Now we got our axis located to this building. And I'll just go back to object selection. And there's our locator. You could see it over here. And now I'm just going to create another geometry. I'll create a card. And what I'm going to do is grab a transform geo, and we'll plug this axis in to the transform geo, so our card will be in the same position as our building. I'm sorry. So let's scale up this building. So we'll go to, let's just go. And we'll just scale up this building so we could have some coverage here. And I will plug this into our 3D scene here with our geometry just so we could see it a little bit better. And I'm going to grab our render camera, and I'm going to have our transform geo look at the render camera. So our card should rotate now and be facing, which is exactly what we wanted. And then I could do some little further refinement on the scale of this building. So what we could do is we could pivot the building down. Let's change the scale of this card in its width, so it's a little bit thinner. Something like that. And now I'm just going to use this transform geo to move it forward in Z just a little bit. Just so it's not behind a building. Something like that. That's a little bit better. So now I'm just going to disable this building stat. And there's our card in place of our building as a placeholder. And now I'm just going to scale up the card in Y a little bit. And I will shift its pivot point up as well. So something like that. So that's a fairly decent placement or representation of this building. So great. There's our render camera and our scene. Now the other thing we're going to do is we're going to use the project 3D node and project our renders onto these geometry pieces so that they could actually have textures. So to begin with, we'll grab our dino character, and I'm going to grab our rendered Zilla. And what we'll do with the dino selected here, we'll do a apply material, and then we'll do a project 3D shader, and we'll plug the project 3D as a material object, and we'll plug our Zilla render as the texture. And I'm going to plug our camera in to our scene graph as well too, so it's a little bit easier for us to view through camera. Just move these out of the way a little bit. Now if we look at our scene graph and we look through our render camera, now our Zilla element is black, but that's currently because we don't have a camera plugged into our Project 3D. So if I plug the camera into our Zilla character, there we go. Now we're seeing it come through. Just doing a little bit of house cleaning here. So now we're seeing our Zillow element, our render being projected onto this geometry, which is going to give us some textures to use to reflect. And I'll do the same thing. I'll grab this Apply Material and Project 3D setup. And what we'll do is we'll apply that same shader group to our card that we generated. So we'll go Apply Material to our card. I'll plug our camera in for the projection. And we'll grab our city render. And we'll plug that. There we go. Now we've got two projection setups using the Project 3D. And so essentially, instead of using the building, we're using this static card because this won't be a dense geometry as a representation. And then we got our Zillow element with his render projected onto him too. So now we could start setting up the reflections. So similar to our previous example, so let's go and output a scanline render. So we'll go scanline render. We'll go object, and our camera will connect right there. And there you have it. So there's our Zillow element coming out of the geometry and our building projection from the card. So if we wanted to do the reflection, we need to use the ray render node. So we'll grab ray render and we'll plug in our scene as our object, and I'll plug in our camera. And let's view that. And that matches what we got from the scanline render. So now if we wanted to reflect Zillow onto the card, what we'll do is we'll place a ray render node, a reflection shader into our card that we're going to be using to be reflective. So we'll go reflection shader and we'll plug that in to our card right there. You could see we've got his reflection based on this projection. And we'll go into the ray render node, and let me pop this out. And we'll go under AOVs. And what we'll do is we'll output the reflection. So we'll say output AOVs, and then reflections we'll do new, call it reflect, and we'll say OK. And right now it's removing it from the beauty, but if I uncheck this, you'll see the reflection added. But since we're going to be using the reflection AOV, we could keep this checked on to remove it because we'll be pulling that through. So let's delete the scanline render so we don't need that anymore. So now if we put a shuffle node down, we could grab the reflect from this pass. And right now it's outputting our Project 3D. So what we could do is do a remove node after our Zilla render, and we could remove all the passes and just keep RGBA so his reflection doesn't come through here. So we'll say remove, and then we'll say, we'll just say keep, and then we'll just say RGBA. And that got rid of his reflection. So that's great. Now we have his reflection coming through. And let's do the same thing. We'll put this remove node down here from our city as well. So now that we've isolated that out, all we're generating right now is his reflection that we'll use with our building. So what we could do now is grab our city element. Let me scoot these over. And I'll grab our element here like so. And what we could do, so I'm just pulling our building through. And if we look at his multi-channel EXR AOVs, we have his reflect pass here, and then we have a material ID that we could use the blue channel just to keep his reflection inside the glass. And the other thing we could use is we could use the ambient occlusion pass to shadow our reflection so it looks more natural as well. So let's grab a couple shuffle nodes. So we'll go shuffle. So for this one, we will grab ambient occlusion. This one, we will grab reflection pass. And then lastly, we'll grab the material ID. And we'll set the output, make sure it's set to the blue channel, which it is, so that's great. So now we could do some treatments to this. So what we could do is take our generated reflection pass, and we could multiply this against the ambient occlusion pass so we could get shading on it. So we'll do a multiply node, multiply merge. And you could see we're getting some shading now from the ambient occlusion pass, which is great. And then what we could do is we could put a grade node down and we could match the colors of this a little bit closer to what this reflect pass is. So what we'll do is we'll just merge this on top of our reflect. And let's sync up these colors a little bit. So what we'll do is let me pop it out. We'll take the multiply node. We'll take some red out, pump a little bit of blue, take more red out, and increase blue a little bit more. And then I'll globally bring the brightness down to maybe 0.7. Let's go 0.6 for now. And what I'll do lastly is multiply this against mask this against the material ID. So we'll say merge, and then we'll set this operation to mask. And we'll put the B input being our reflection that we're outputting. And then we'll use the material ID matte so that his reflection is really just contained to the windows. So if I disable and enable, you could see what that's doing. And now if we view this on top of our building, we've got this added reflection from Zilla onto this building using the ray render node. And if we can put this back on top of our main render, let me grab this. And you could see we're getting this added reflection from him using his projection onto the geometry of the building, which is great. We could go look at another frame too. So maybe we could look at 1001. And again, let's see what our reflection looks like that's being generated. And we view this. You could see we got more of that reflection coming through. So it's another cheat that we could do in comp to enhance our reflections using projections, using project 3D of our render onto the Zilla geometry, and using the city building to project the city render onto a simple card. And then by simply putting a reflection shader and using the ray render node and outputting an AOV from that, we can do some simple treatments to this reflection pass and add that on and enhance our scene. So that's another more advanced way of using ray render to create reflections, to add to our scene and create a little bit more complexity and interest. Thank you so much.